They say Seoul never sleeps, but on that particular November evening, Paradise Seoul was wide awake and dressed to kill. I stood at the entrance of the most exclusive auction house in Gangnam, my reflection staring back at me from the polished marble floors that probably cost more than most people's houses. The gold-trimmed doors stretched 15 feet high, and beyond them I could hear the murmur of old money and new power mixing in a language that transcended Korean, English, or Mandarin. It was the universal language of wealth, and tonight I was about to teach them a new dialect, the language of consequence. My name is Amara Thompson, and I don't do ordinary Tuesdays. I adjusted the collar of my midnight blue Tom Ford suit custom tailored because at 5'9" with curves that refused to apologize for existing, off the rack was never an option. My locks were swept up in an elegant bun, small diamond studs caught the light at my ears, and my makeup was flawless. Not because I was trying to fit in with the crowd inside, but because when you're about to bring down a dragon, you dress for the occasion. The doorman, a young Korean man in a crisp uniform, hesitated as I approached. I could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. Black woman, alone, at Paradise Seoul. The math wasn't adding up for him. "Good evening," I said in perfect Korean, my accent soul polished from 2 years living in Itaewon. "Amara Thompson, I'm on the list." He checked his tablet, and I watched his eyebrows rise slightly. Whatever he saw there made him step aside with a respectful bow. "Welcome, Ms. Thompson. The auction begins in 20 minutes. Your paddle number is 73. I thanked him and stepped inside. The main gallery of Paradise Seoul was exactly what you'd expect from a place where million-dollar transactions happened with the casual wave of a hand. Crystal chandeliers hung from a ceiling painted with classical Korean art, dragons and phoenixes swirling in eternal dance. The walls were covered in silk panels, and scattered throughout the room were display cases holding tonight's offerings, rare paintings, ancient ceramics, jewelry that once adorned royalty. But I wasn't here for any of that. I was here for item number 47, Sunset Overhanging by Park Jae-hoon, a relatively unknown artist from the 1950s. The painting itself was worth maybe $50,000 to the right collector. But hidden in its frame, between the canvas and the backing, was something worth infinitely more: a ledger. A physical, handwritten ledger that documented $50 million in stolen assets, laundered through a network of shell companies, ghost employees, and real estate deals that existed only on paper. $50 million that belonged to my client, Vincent Okonkwo, a Nigerian oil magnate whose business partner had betrayed him, stolen his money, and disappeared into the Korean underground. It had taken me 18 months to track that money, following digital breadcrumbs through Singapore, Hong Kong, Tokyo, and finally here. To Seoul, to Paradise Seoul, to him. Kang Min-jun, I spotted him immediately, not because he stood out, but because everyone else's energy bent around him like light around a black hole. He stood near the center of the room, surrounded by a constellation of men in expensive suits and women whose jewelry could fund a small country's GDP. He was tall for a Korean man, maybe 6 feet, with broad shoulders that filled out his custom black suit perfectly. His hair was styled back, revealing a face that was all sharp angles and cold calculation. Handsome in the way a sword is handsome, beautiful but dangerous. They called him the Dragon of Gangnam, and the nickname wasn't for show. Kang Min-jun controlled an empire built on shadows and fear, luxury real estate developments that displaced entire neighborhoods, underground casinos where fortunes changed hands every night. Legitimate businesses that served as fronts for money laundering, human trafficking, and weapon deals that armed conflicts most people would never hear about. He was 38 years old and commanded more power than men twice his age with twice his experience. And he had absolutely no idea who I was. Yet, I accepted a glass of champagne from a passing waiter, Dom Perignon, because of course it was, and began to circulate through the room. I caught snippets of conversation in multiple languages. A Chinese businessman discussing rare earth mineral rights. A Japanese tech CEO talking about AI development, an American film producer complaining about cryptocurrency volatility. This wasn't just an auction, this was a meeting place for people who shape the world from the shadows. You're new. The voice came from my left. I turned to find a woman in her 50s wearing a red cheongsam that probably cost more than a Tesla. Her eyes were sharp, assessing. First time at Paradise Seoul, I confirmed, smiling politely. I heard it was the place to be for serious collectors. Serious collectors with serious money, she corrected, her English accent British educated. What are you bidding on tonight? Item 47, the Park Jae-hoon. Her perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose. That old thing, interesting choice. Most people are here for the Joseon dynasty ceramics or the contemporary pieces. She studied me more carefully. You know something about that painting that others don't? I took a sip of champagne. I know exactly what it's worth. She smiled, the kind of smile a shark gives before it bites. I'm Min Seo Park, I deal in acquisitions. Amara Thompson, I deal in recovery. Recovery, her interest sharpened. What kind of recovery? The kind that finds things people thought were lost forever. Before she could probe further, a bell chimed softly through the gallery. The auction was about to begin. We moved into the main auction room, a theater-style space with velvet seats arranged in ascending rows. The stage at the front held a podium where the auctioneer would stand, and behind it, a massive screen for displaying the items. The room could seat maybe 200 people, and tonight it was nearly full. I found my seat, deliberately chosen in the middle section, not too close, not too far, visible but not prominent. Kang Min-jun sat in the front row naturally. Center seat, the position of power. His entourage filled the seats around him like armor. The auctioneer, an elegant Korean woman in her 60s, took the podium. She welcomed everyone in Korean first, then English, then Mandarin. The auction rules were explained, paddles up for bids, no photography, all sales final, and we began. The first items moved quickly. A Ming Dynasty vase went for $2 million. A contemporary sculpture by a rising Korean artist sold for $800,000. Jewelry, paintings, rare books. Each item brought forward, displayed on the screen, bid upon by people for whom money was merely a way of keeping score. I waited, item after item. My champagne glass remained full. I'd barely touched it. I needed to be sharp. Min Seo Park, seated a few rows ahead, turned once to glance at me. She was curious. Good, let her be curious. Finally, after 46 items had been sold, the screen changed. Item number 47, the auctioneer announced. Sunset Overhanging by Park Jae-hoon, oil on canvas, 1952. A beautiful representation of Seoul during the post-war period. We'll start the bidding at $30,000. The painting appeared on the screen. It was lovely in an understated way. The Han River at sunset, the sky streaked with orange and purple, the city barely visible in the background, nothing spectacular, nothing that would make collectors fight over it, unless you knew what it really held. I raised my paddle. 30,000. A few heads turned, not many. It was a low-value item by Paradise Seoul standards. 30,000 from paddle 73, the auctioneer confirmed. Do I hear 35? Silence. 30,000 going once, another paddle rose, a man I didn't recognize. 35,000, I raised mine immediately. 40,000, the other bidder hesitated, then lowered his paddle, smart man. 40,000 from paddle 73, the auctioneer said. Going once, going twice, 100,000. The voice cut through the room like a blade through silk. Kang Min-jun hadn't raised his paddle, he'd simply spoken, his voice carrying despite not being loud. Every head in the room turned to look at him. The auctioneer blinked. 100,000 from Mr. Kang. Do I hear? I raised my paddle. 150,000. Now I had everyone's attention. Kang Min-jun turned in his seat, his dark eyes scanning the room until they found me. For a moment, just a moment, our gazes locked. I saw the calculation happening behind those eyes. Who was I? Why was I bidding against him? Did I not know who he was? Oh, I knew exactly who he was. 200,000, he said, still looking at me. 250,000, I countered immediately. A murmur rippled through the crowd. This was unusual. Park Jae-hoon paintings didn't go for this kind of money. Something else was happening here, and everyone in the room could sense it. Kang Min-jun stood up. He was making a statement. This wasn't about the painting anymore. 500,000, he declared. The room went silent. I should have backed down. Anyone else would have backed down. This was Kang Min-jun's territory, his city, his world. Challenging him publicly was either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. I raised my paddle. 600,000. The murmur became a buzz. People were whispering now openly. Who was this woman? Did she have a death wish? Kang Min-jun's jaw tightened. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not publicly and especially not by someone he didn't recognize. He turned fully to face me and then he began walking up the aisle toward my seat. The room held its breath. He stopped at the end of my row, his presence filling the space like a storm about to break. Up close, I could see the scar on his left temple, partially hidden by his hair. The intensity in his eyes was like staring into a furnace. Who are you? He asked in Korean, his voice low but carrying. I responded in the same language, keeping my voice calm and clear. Amara Thompson, paddle 73, and I believe it's my bid. His eyes narrowed. You're making a mistake. The only mistake here would be backing down when I know what I want. You have no idea what you're dealing with. I smiled then, not friendly, not warm, a smile that carried edges. I know exactly what I'm dealing with, Mr. Kang. The question is, do you? Something flickered in his eyes, surprise maybe, or the first hint of realization that I wasn't some random collector who'd wandered in off the street. He leaned closer and I could smell his cologne, something expensive and dark, cedar and smoke. That painting isn't worth $600,000. Then why are you bidding on it? He didn't answer. Instead, he turned to the auctioneer. $1 million. The room erupted. People were standing now, phones coming out despite the no photography rule. This was unprecedented. Kang Min-jun had just bid $1 million on a painting worth 50,000 and everyone wanted to know why. The auctioneer looked flustered but maintained her composure. $1 million from Mr. Kang. Do I hear? I should have stopped. $1 million was insane, but I hadn't come this far to quit now. I raised my paddle. 1.2 million. Kang Min-jun's expression went from annoyed to genuinely angry. His hand moved, a small gesture barely noticeable, and suddenly two large men in dark suits were moving up the aisle toward me. Security, his security. I think there's been a misunderstanding, Kang Min-jun said, loud enough for the whole room to hear. He switched to English, probably assuming I'd understand that better. His English was perfect, barely accented. This woman is clearly confused about where she is and what kind of event this is. Paradise Seoul is for serious collectors, not? He paused, his eyes raking over me with deliberate slowness. Curious tourists who wandered into the wrong building. The insult was clear, the dismissal was clear, the implication was crystal. I didn't belong here. The two security men reached my row. Ma'am, one of them said in English, his tone professionally polite but with steel underneath. I'm going to have to ask you to come with us. I didn't move. I'm in the middle of an auction. I have every right to be here. You're causing a disturbance, Kang Min-jun said, and now there was something cruel in his smile. Paradise Seoul has standards. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at one of the tourist markets in Myeongdong. I hear they're very welcoming to visitors. The racism wasn't overt enough to be called out directly, but everyone in that room heard it. The pause before visitors, the emphasis on welcoming. The way he'd looked at me like I was something that had wandered in from the street, and the room 200 of Asia's wealthiest, most powerful people said nothing, did nothing, just watched. I felt the heat of humiliation rising up my neck, but I kept my expression neutral. This was the moment. This was what I'd been waiting for, even though experiencing it felt like swallowing glass. The security men moved closer, ready to physically remove me if necessary. Min Seo Park, the woman I'd spoken with earlier, was watching with undisguised fascination. Several other people had their phones out, recording despite the rules. This would be all over Korean social media within the hour. The black woman who crashed Paradise Seoul and got thrown out by Kang Min-jun. I stood up slowly, deliberately. Smoothed down my suit jacket, picked up my clutch purse. "You're right," I said, my voice carrying through the silent room. I was still speaking Korean, making sure everyone understood. "I apologize for the disturbance." Kang Min-jun's smile widened. He thought he'd won. I turned to the auctioneer, who looked deeply uncomfortable with the entire situation. "Please withdraw my bid. I won't be participating further." Then I looked directly at Kang Min-jun and I smiled. Really smiled, the kind of smile that should have warned him that something was wrong. "Enjoy your painting, Mr. Kang. I hope it brings you exactly what you deserve." His eyes narrowed slightly. He sensed something, but he couldn't figure out what. I walked down the aisle toward the exit, the security men flanking me like I was a criminal being escorted out. Every eye in the room followed me. I could feel their gazes, some pitying, some amused, some uncomfortable with what they'd just witnessed, but too afraid of Kang Min-jun to say anything. The doors closed behind me with a soft, expensive click. I stood in the marble foyer for a moment, alone with the doorman who looked supremely uncomfortable. Then I pulled out my phone and made a call. "It's done," I said when the line connected. He took the bait. "Are you sure?" The voice on the other end belonged to James Chen, my partner in this operation. Former Interpol, current private investigator, and the only person I trusted completely in this business. Completely sure, he just paid $1 million for a $50,000 painting specifically to humiliate me in front of every major player in Seoul's underground economy. I walked toward the windows that overlooked the street. His ego won't let him see the trap. Then we moved to phase 2. I checked my watch. Give it 30 minutes. Let him think he won. Let him enjoy his victory. Then we show him exactly who I am. "Amara," James's voice carried a note of warning. "Once we do this, there's no going back. Kang Min-jun doesn't forgive and he doesn't forget." "Neither do I, James. Neither do I." I ended the call and turned back toward the auction house doors. Through the glass, I could see the auction had resumed. Kang Min-jun was back in his seat, probably basking in the approval of his peers. The woman who dared to challenge him had been put in her place. Order was restored. He had no idea that in exactly 30 minutes his entire world was going to implode. I smiled and settled in to wait. Inside the auction house, the atmosphere had shifted. What had been a normal evening of wealthy people spending obscene amounts of money had become something electric. People weren't really paying attention to the items anymore. They were whispering, speculating, replaying what had just happened. I knew this because I'd placed 3 people inside that room, not bidders. They couldn't afford Paradise Seoul even if they wanted to, but staff, a waiter, a display assistant, and Min Seo Park, yes, Min Seo Park, the woman in the red cheongsam who'd approached me earlier. She wasn't actually a collector. She was a former NIS agent, Korean National Intelligence Service, who'd gone private after getting tired of government bureaucracy and government paychecks. She specialized in infiltration and information gathering, and she was worth every penny of the exorbitant fee I was paying her. My phone buzzed, a text from Min Seo. "He's preening like a peacock, accepted congratulations from at least 6 people, hasn't even looked at the painting, it's being wrapped up now. Should be delivered to his penthouse within the hour." Perfect, I typed back. "Phase 2 in 25 minutes, make sure you're recording everything." "Always am, this is going to be legendary." She wasn't wrong. I moved to the building's coffee shop, a small, elegant space on the first floor that served drinks that cost more than most restaurant meals. I ordered an Americano and settled into a corner table where I could see the elevator banks. My phone buzzed again. This time it was James. "Teams are in position, waiting for your signal." I'd spent 18 months building this moment. 18 months of tracking money through digital labyrinths, bribing officials, interviewing witnesses, and putting together a case so airtight that not even Kang Min-jun's army of lawyers could find a loophole. But evidence wasn't enough. Men like Kang Min-jun didn't go down just because you had proof of their crimes. They had too much money, too many connections, too much power to be touched by something as mundane as the law. No, men like Kang Min-jun went down when you destroyed the one thing they valued more than money, their reputation. Their image, their untouchable status. That's why I'd let him humiliate me. That's why I'd played the role of the confused, out-of-place black woman who didn't understand Korean high society. Because in 30 minutes, in front of every single person who'd witnessed my humiliation, I was going to return the favor 100-fold. My Americano arrived and I sipped it slowly, watching the minutes tick by on my watch. 20 minutes, 15 minutes, 10 minutes. At the 5-minute mark, my phone rang, unknown number, but I knew exactly who it was. Ms. Thompson? The voice was female, professional, speaking in English with a Korean accent. Speaking. This is Seo Yeon from Paradise Seoul's security. I wanted to personally apologize for the incident earlier this evening. There was a misunderstanding and we should have handled the situation with more discretion. A misunderstanding, that's what they were calling it, not racism, not abuse of power, a misunderstanding. I appreciate the apology, I said, keeping my voice neutral. We'd like to offer you complimentary admission to our next auction as a gesture of goodwill. Would that be acceptable? That's very generous. However, I don't think I'll be needing it. There was a pause. Ms. Thompson, Paradise Seoul values all of our potential clients, and we'd hate for this evening's misunderstanding to damage our relationship. Our relationship? We didn't have a relationship, but someone senior in Paradise Seoul's management had realized that throwing out a legitimate bidder on Kang Min-jun's whim might have legal and reputational consequences. Too little, too late. I'll consider it, I said. Thank you for calling. I ended the call before she could say anything else. My watch showed 2 minutes. I finished my Americano, gathered my things, and walked back toward the auction house entrance. The doorman from earlier looked surprised to see me. Ms. Thompson, I thought, is the auction still in progress? Yes, but I'm not sure if I left something inside. I'll just be a moment. I walked past him before he could object. The auction house doors opened with a whisper and I stepped back into the marble foyer. Through the doors to the main auction room, I could hear the auctioneer's voice. They were on item 68 now. The evening was winding down. My phone buzzed one last time. James, we're live. 3, 2, 1. I pushed open the doors to the auction room and walked back inside. Every head turned. The murmuring started immediately. Kang Min-jun, still in his front row seat, twisted around, his expression shifting from surprise to annoyance to something harder. The auctioneer faltered in her presentation. I walked down the aisle, my heels clicking on the floor, until I stood in the center of the room where everyone could see me. I apologize for the interruption, I said in Korean, my voice carrying. But I believe there's been a terrible misunderstanding, and I think Mr. Kang and everyone here deserves to know the truth. Kang Min-jun stood up, his face darkening. Security, please, I said, raising a hand. Just give me 2 minutes. If you don't find what I have to say interesting, I'll leave peacefully. He should have had me thrown out immediately, but ego is a funny thing. Part of him wanted to hear what I could possibly say that would be interesting. Part of him wanted to humiliate me again publicly to reinforce his dominance. 2 minutes, he said coldly. Then you're gone. I smiled. Thank you. I pulled out my phone and touched a button. The massive screen behind the auctioneer, the one they'd been using to display auction items, suddenly changed. Now it showed a bank account number, and next to it a balance, $50 million. That, I said, pointing to the screen, is $50 million belonging to my client, Vincent Okonkwo. It was stolen from him 3 years ago by his business partner, David Chen, who then disappeared. It took me 18 months, but I finally tracked the money. Would you like to know where it went? The room was dead silent. The screen changed again. Now it showed a web of transactions, arrows connecting bank accounts in Singapore, Hong Kong, Tokyo, and finally Seoul. Each arrow was labeled with dates and amounts. The money was laundered through 17 different shell companies, I continued, most of them owned by various criminal organizations, but the final destination, I paused, letting the tension build. The final destination was here, Seoul. Specifically, it was used to purchase property from a company called Hangang Development Group. I looked directly at Kang Min Jun, his face had gone very still. Hangang Development Group, I continued, which is a subsidiary of Dragon Enterprises, which is owned by, I gestured toward him. Well, I think everyone here knows who owns Dragon Enterprises. The screen changed again. Now it showed property deeds, incorporation papers, tax documents, all bearing Kang Min Jun's name or the names of his known associates. Now, I said, my voice taking on a sharper edge, I'm not suggesting that Mr. Kang personally orchestrated the theft. In fact, I'm fairly certain he had no idea where that $50 million originally came from. Money laundering operations are designed so that the final recipient has plausible deniability. I started walking slowly toward the front of the room, toward where Kang Min Jun stood frozen. But here's the interesting part. Once I tracked the money to Dragon Enterprises, I started looking more carefully at Dragon Enterprises, and do you know what I found? The screen changed again, more documents, more bank accounts, more transactions. I found evidence of systematic money laundering spanning the past 7 years. Over $2 billion in illegal funds moved through your properties, your casinos, your businesses, Mr. Kang. I found shell companies buying real estate with cash that came from arms deals, human trafficking, drug operations, and yes, financial fraud. Kang Min Jun's hand moved toward his pocket, probably reaching for his phone to call his lawyers. I wouldn't do that if I were you, I said quietly. You see, 15 minutes ago, I sent this entire file to the Financial Supervisory Service, the Supreme Prosecutor's Office, and Interpol. Right now, as we speak, prosecutors from 3 different countries are reviewing evidence that you have knowingly profited from criminal enterprises for years. His face went white, not pale white. The realization of what was happening was hitting him like a physical blow. But I continued, and now I was standing right in front of him. That's not why I'm really here. The screen changed one final time. Now it showed a photograph, a shipping container, and inside that container, faces, dozens of faces, women and children cramped together, terrified. The room gasped. Human trafficking, I said, my voice hard as diamonds. Your real profitable business, Mr. Kang. You move people like cargo, you sell human beings to the highest bidder. And you do it through a network that spans from Southeast Asia to Europe to the United States. I could see people in the audience pulling away from him, their faces showing disgust and horror. Whatever power Kang Min Jun had held in this room was evaporating by the second. So here's what's going to happen, I said. Right now, Korean National Police are raiding 17 of your properties. Your bank accounts, all 32 of them that I've identified, are being frozen by international banking authorities. Your shipping operation at Busan Port has been shut down by customs officials who found some very interesting cargo. I stepped even closer until I was looking directly into his eyes. You're finished, Mr. Kang, and the only question now is whether you go down fighting and spend the rest of your life in prison or whether you cooperate and maybe, just maybe, you spend only a decade or 2 behind bars. His hands were shaking. I could see rage warring with fear on his face. He wanted to kill me, I could see it in his eyes. But he also knew that touching me now in front of all these witnesses with law enforcement already closing in would be the stupidest thing he could possibly do. Who are you? He whispered, his voice hoarse. I told you, Amara Thompson, I'm a recovery specialist. I find things that are lost and I take down people who think they're above the law. I pulled a business card from my clutch and held it out to him. He didn't take it, so I placed it on his seat. That has my contact information. The FBI, Interpol, and the Korean prosecutors will all want to talk to you. I suggest you get a very good lawyer, several actually. I turn to address the room. I apologize for disrupting your evening, but I thought you should all know who you've been doing business with. My eyes swept over the crowd. Some of you probably knew, some of you probably suspected, and some of you are genuinely shocked. Regardless, this is your warning. The world is changing. The shadows you all hide in are getting smaller, and people like me, we're everywhere. I walked back up the aisle toward the exit. Min Seo Park, still in her seat, gave me the smallest of nods. She'd recorded everything. As I reached the doors, Kang Min Jun's voice rang out, "This isn't over." I turned back to look at him one last time. "You're right," I said. "It's not over, but you've already lost. You just don't know it yet." And I walked out. The marble foyer was chaos. The security was on their phones, probably getting orders from multiple directions. The doorman had been joined by what looked like the building's entire management team. I walked straight to the exit. "Ms. Thompson," someone called my name. I turned to see a man in his 50s wearing an expensive suit and an expression of barely contained panic. "I'm Director Kim, the managing director of Paradise Seoul. We need to talk about—" "No, we don't," I interrupted. "You need to talk to your lawyers." I imagine the prosecutors will want to know how a legitimate auction house ended up being a gathering place for people involved in money laundering and human trafficking. His face went ashen. "We had no knowledge, then you should be fine," I said simply. "Goodbye, Director Kim." I pushed through the golden doors and out into the Seoul night. My phone rang immediately. "James." "Holy shit, Amara, that was—" "I know. The Korean police just hit all 17 locations simultaneously. They're finding everything: ledgers, encrypted computers, physical evidence of the trafficking operation, and the timing was perfect because Kang's people didn't have a chance to destroy anything." "What about Kang himself?" "Still at Paradise Seoul, apparently. His lawyers are on the way, but I'm hearing that the prosecutors are planning to arrest him tonight. They don't want to risk him fleeing the country." I smiled. "Good. Amara, you need to be careful. Even if Kang goes down, he has people. Loyal people, people who might decide to take revenge." "I'm always careful, James." "No, you're always brave. There's a difference." I hailed a taxi and gave the driver an address in Gangnam, a safe house I'd rented under a different name. As we pulled away from Paradise Seoul, I could see news vans already arriving. Someone had tipped them off, probably Min Seo. She had contacts in every major media outlet in Seoul. By tomorrow morning, this would be the biggest story in Korea. The dragon of Gangnam, brought down by a black woman he'd tried to humiliate. The symbolism would not be lost on anyone. My phone buzzed with a text from Min Seo. "You're my hero. I've never seen anything like that. He looked like he was going to have a heart attack." I texted back, "Did you get everything?" "Every second, multiple angles. I've already sent copies to your secure server, and I might have accidentally sent a copy to a journalist friend at the Korea Times." Accidentally. Very accidentally, these things happen. I smiled and pocketed my phone. The taxi wound through Gangnam streets, past the glittering towers and luxury boutiques that represented Seoul's wealth and power. Somewhere in one of those towers, Kang Min-jun was probably watching his empire collapse in real time. Part of me, a small, petty part, wished I could see his face right now. But the larger part of me felt something else: satisfaction. Not the vicious pleasure of revenge, but the deep satisfaction of a job well done, of justice served, of power held accountable. $50 million would be returned to Vincent Okonkwo, dozens of trafficked women and children would be freed, one of Seoul's most dangerous criminals would face trial, and every other criminal who'd been in that auction house tonight had just been put on notice that their time of operating with impunity was ending. My phone rang again. This time it was a number I recognized, Vincent Okonkwo himself. "Mr. Okonkwo," I answered. "Ms. Thompson." His voice was warm, rich with Nigerian inflection. I just received a very interesting call from the Korean Financial Supervisory Service. They tell me that $50 million has been located and will be returned to me pending investigation completion. That's correct. They also tell me that the man who helped steal it has been arrested along with his associates. So correct. There was a pause, then a deep chuckle. My friend, you are a miracle worker. I was prepared to accept that money as lost forever. How did you do it? Very carefully, Mr. Okonkwo, very carefully. I'm transferring the second half of your fee immediately, plus a bonus, a substantial bonus. That's not necessary, Ms. Thompson. You recovered $50 million and brought down a criminal empire in the process. Whatever I pay you will still be far less than what you deserve. Accept the bonus, buy yourself something nice. I thought about the humiliation in Paradise Seoul, the eyes watching as I was dismissed as unworthy, the casual racism disguised as concern. Actually, I said, if you're feeling generous, I know some organizations that help trafficking victims. They could use funding. Silence on the other end, then. You are a remarkable woman, Ms. Thompson. I will make sure they receive a generous donation in your name. Thank you, Mr. Okonkwo. No, thank you. After we hung up, I leaned back in the taxi seat and closed my eyes. I was exhausted. The kind of exhaustion that comes from months of preparation, hours of tension, and the adrenaline crash after it's all over, but I couldn't rest yet. The next morning, I woke up in my safe house to find that I'd become famous. My phone was flooded with messages, calls, and notifications. The story was everywhere: Korean news sites, international media, social media trending topics. Dragon of Gangnam Falls was the most common headline, but there were variations. Black American investigator exposes trafficking ring, Paradise Seoul scandal rocks Korean elite, how one woman brought down a criminal empire. Videos from inside the auction house had leaked, of course they had, multiple angles showing my confrontation with Kang Min-jun, the screen displaying his crimes. His face going white, the whole thing, and the story I'd let them throw me out that had leaked too. Someone had filmed it on their phone. I watched myself being escorted out by security, the dismissive way Kang Min-jun had spoken about me, the racism barely hidden under a veneer of politeness. The narrative was perfect. Arrogant criminal humiliates woman, woman returns to destroy him. David and Goliath with a modern twist. I scrolled through the coverage, noting which outlets were focusing on the human trafficking angle, good, which were focusing on the money laundering, also good, and which were focusing on me personally, concerning but inevitable. A text came through from James: you need to see the morning news, CNN International. Now, I switched on the TV and found CNN. A panel discussion was in progress with a headline running across the bottom: American investigator exposes Korean crime lord. Unprecedented operation, a security analyst was saying. Ms. Thompson basically conducted an 18-month investigation that exposed not just money laundering but a significant human trafficking network, and she did it privately without government resources. The question, another panelist interjected, is why didn't law enforcement catch this earlier? Kang Min-jun was a known figure in Seoul. How was he operating this openly? Corruption, the first analyst said bluntly. He had connections, paid the right people, maintained a legitimate business front. It took an outsider, someone without ties to the Korean system, to actually build a case against him. The discussion continued, but I muted it. They were going to analyze this for days, maybe weeks. Every decision I'd made, every move I'd played, some of them would get it right, most of them would get it wrong. My phone rang, unknown number, but the country code was Korean. Ms. Thompson. The voice was male, speaking formal Korean. Speaking. This is Prosecutor Hwang Young-soo from the Supreme Prosecutor's Office. I'm handling the Kang Min-jun case. I wanted to thank you for your cooperation and to inform you that we've formally arrested Mr. Kang and 17 of his associates. The evidence you provided has been invaluable. I'm glad I could help. We'll need you to provide a full statement, of course, and you may need to testify when this goes to trial. I understand. I'll make myself available. There is one other matter, he paused. Mr. Kang's lawyers are arguing that the evidence was obtained illegally. They're claiming you hacked into financial systems, bribed officials, and conducted surveillance without proper warrants. I smiled. I'd been expecting this. Prosecutor H. Wang, every piece of evidence I obtained was gathered legally. I'm a licensed investigator with authorization to operate in multiple jurisdictions. All financial information came from public records, whistleblowers, or information provided voluntarily by cooperating witnesses. I'm happy to provide documentation of my methods. I thought you might say that. Please send everything to my office. I will, but Prosecutor H. Wang, you should know that defense attorneys always claim evidence is illegal when they can't refute it any other way. Don't let them muddy the waters. The evidence speaks for itself. Believe me, Ms. Thompson, we have no intention of letting Mr. Kang walk on a technicality. After the call ended, I spent 2 hours compiling documentation of my investigation methods and sending it to the prosecutor's office. Every interview I'd conducted, I'd recorded with consent. Every financial document I'd obtained came from legitimate sources. Every piece of surveillance had been conducted in public spaces or with proper authorization. I'd known from the beginning that my methods would be scrutinized, so I'd been extremely careful to stay on the right side of every law. Around noon, there was a knock at my safe house door. I checked the security camera, a habit that had saved my life more than once, and saw Min Seo Park standing in the hallway holding a bag that smelled amazing. I opened the door. Titi akbaki and kimchi, she announced, holding up the bag. I figured you might be hungry. You figured right. We sat at my small dining table and I discovered that I was actually starving. When you're running on adrenaline, you don't notice things like hunger. You're everywhere, Min Seo said, scrolling through her phone while eating. Social media is going crazy. Dragon Falls is trending worldwide. People are calling you everything from hero to vigilante to the Beyonce of investigators. I nearly choked on my titi akbaki. The what? The Beyonce of investigators. You know, powerful black woman taking down men who deserve it. Twitter is having a field day. Twitter is always having a field day. True, but seriously, Amara, you've become a symbol. The videos of Kang throwing you out combined with the videos of you taking him down, it's powerful stuff. Women especially are responding to it. And in Korea, where sexual assault and gender discrimination cases have been so prominent lately, this is resonating. I hadn't considered that angle. I'd been focused on the criminal justice aspects, the money, the trafficking, the prosecution, but Min Seo was right, the optics of a woman being dismissed and humiliated, then returning to systematically destroy her attacker's power, that narrative resonated beyond just criminal justice. There's going to be backlash, I said quietly. Oh, absolutely. It's already starting. Some people are calling you an American interloper who doesn't understand Korean culture. Others are defending Kang, saying he's being railroaded. And there's a lovely segment on one of the conservative news channels about how foreign investigators shouldn't be allowed to operate in Korea. I'm licensed to operate in Korea. I've followed every regulation. Since when has that mattered to people who want to be angry? Min Seo shrugged. You're going to have defenders and detractors. That's life when you do something big. My phone buzzed. Another text from James. FYI, U.S. State Department called. They want to make sure you're safe. Apparently, there's concern about retaliation. I showed Min Seo the text. They're not wrong to be concerned, she said seriously. Kang has people who are loyal to him. Even with him in custody, someone might decide to make a point. I'm not leaving Seoul until the trial, I said firmly. If I run now, it sends the message that I was only brave enough to stand up to him from a distance. That's very heroic, also very potentially fatal. Then I'll be careful, extra careful. I can help with that, Min Seo offered. I have contacts, people who owe me favors. I can arrange security. I appreciate that. We finished eating in companionable silence, then Min Seo pulled out her laptop. I want to show you something, she said, typing rapidly. The screen filled with social media posts, news articles, and forum discussions. Look at what's happening. I leaned in and started reading. The posts were from all over the world, Korea, obviously, but also the US, Europe, Africa, Asia. Women sharing their own stories of being dismissed, underestimated, or humiliated by men in power, stories of fighting back, stories of refusing to accept being treated as less than. You started something, Min Seo said quietly. You probably didn't mean to, but you did. Women see themselves in you. Especially women of color, especially women in male-dominated fields. You showed them that it's possible to stand up to powerful men and win. I read through more posts. Some were inspirational, some were angry, some were vulnerable, sharing painful experiences, but all of them had one thing in common: they were refusing to be silent. This is bigger than Kang Min Jun, I said slowly. Yes, this is about power, gender, race, and justice. You touched a nerve. My phone rang again. This time it was a US number I didn't recognize. Ms. Thompson, my name is Susan Martinez. I'm a producer for 60 Minutes. We'd like to do a feature on your investigation and the Kang Min Jun case. Would you be interested in an interview? I put the phone on speaker so Min Seo could hear. I appreciate the interest, but I'm not sure I'm ready for that level of media attention. I understand, but Ms. Thompson, this story is going to be told whether you participate or not. Wouldn't you prefer to make sure it's told accurately? She had a point. Let me think about it, I said. Can I call you back in 24 hours? Of course, but I should tell you that we're not the only ones interested. I know for a fact that other networks are reaching out. If you want any control over the narrative, you should move quickly. After I hung up, Min Seo looked at me thoughtfully. She's right, the story is already out there. If you don't tell your version, someone else will tell theirs. I'm an investigator, not a celebrity. You're both now, whether you like it or not. I stood up and walked to the window. From my safe house, I had a view of Seoul, the Han River winding through the city, mountains in the distance, towers of glass and steel reaching toward the sky. Somewhere in this city, Kang Min Jun was sitting in a cell, probably still trying to figure out how his perfect empire had fallen so quickly. Somewhere else in this city, women and children who'd been trafficked were being freed, given medical care, offered a chance at a normal life. And all over this city, people were talking about justice, about power, about what happens when the untouchable get touched. Okay, I said, turning back to Min Seo. I'll do the interview, but on my terms, and I want to talk about the victims, not just about taking down Kang. That's perfect, Min Seo said. That's exactly what you should do. The interview aired 3 weeks later. By then, the Kang Min Jun case had grown into one of the biggest scandals in Korean history. The prosecutors had uncovered even more than I'd found: additional trafficking operations, connections to organized crime in Japan and China, politicians who'd accepted bribes, businessmen who'd knowingly profited from illegal activities. 17 people had been arrested. 3 had turned state's evidence. And Kang Min Jun's lawyers were desperately trying to negotiate a plea deal because they knew a trial would be a bloodbath. I watched the 60 Minutes interview in my hotel room. I'd moved from the safe house to a nice hotel in Itaewon, figuring that public visibility was actually safer than hiding. The piece was well done. They showed the auction house footage, interviewed Korean prosecutors, talked to trafficking survivors, and gave context about the larger issues of organized crime in Asia. And in the middle of it was my interview. I'd worn the same midnight blue Tom Ford suit I'd worn to Paradise Seoul, a deliberate choice. Why did you let him humiliate you? Susan Martinez had asked. You knew who he was, you knew what he was capable of. Why not just turn over the evidence to authorities? Because men like Kang Min Jun don't fear the law, I'd answered. They have lawyers, connections, money. Arrest them and they're out on bail in hours, but their reputation, their image of being untouchable, that's their real power, and the only way to destroy that power is to show everyone publicly, undeniably, that they can be touched. But you paid a price for that, the way he spoke to you, the racism, the dismissal, that must have been painful. It was, but it was also necessary. I needed him to feel so confident, so certain of his superiority, that he wouldn't see the trap until it was too late. Some people have criticized you, said that you were showboating, that you could have accomplished the same thing without the public confrontation. I'd smiled at that. Those people have never had to fight someone who has all the power. When you're up against someone like Kang Min Jun, you use every weapon you have. And sometimes the best weapon is making them underestimate you. The interview showed footage of the trafficking victims being freed. Women and children, most of them from Southeast Asia, some of them so young it hurt to look at them. This is what it was really about, I'd said, looking directly into the camera. Not revenge, not ego, these people, giving them their lives back and making sure everyone knows what men like Kang Min Jun really are behind their expensive suits and fancy offices. The piece ended with an update. Kang Min Jun had rejected a plea deal and would be going to trial. His lawyers were confident they could. I knew better. The trial began 2 months later in June. Seoul was experiencing a typically humid summer, the kind where the air feels thick enough to swim through. I'd stayed in Korea the entire time, working on other cases remotely but mostly preparing for testimony. The courthouse was besieged, media from around the world, protesters both supporting and denouncing Kang, security everywhere. I arrived early on the first day of testimony, dressed in a conservative black suit, hair pulled back, minimal jewelry. I wanted the focus to be on my words, not my appearance. The courtroom was packed. Kang Min Jun sat at the defense table, flanked by 4 lawyers. He'd lost weight. His suit, though still expensive, didn't quite fit right anymore. But his eyes still held that same intensity, that same rage. When I took the stand, we made eye contact. He stared at me like he was trying to will me into non-existence. I stared back and smiled. The prosecutor, Hwang Young-soo, approached the stand. Ms. Thompson, please tell the court how you came to investigate Kang Min Jun, and I did. For 3 hours, I walked the court through every step of my investigation, how I'd tracked the $50 million, how that had led me to Dragon Enterprises, how deeper investigation had revealed the extent of Kang's criminal operations. I presented documents, bank records, testimony from witnesses. I explained how the money laundering worked, how the trafficking operation functioned, how Kang had maintained a legitimate business front while running a criminal empire. The defense lawyers tried to shake my testimony. They questioned my methods, my credentials, my motives. Ms. Thompson, one of them asked, isn't it true that you were paid $2 million to conduct this investigation? Yes. So you had a financial incentive to find evidence against my client, regardless of whether that evidence was accurate? No, I had a financial incentive to find the truth. If the truth had been that your client was innocent, I would have reported that. But you didn't find him innocent, did you? Because he isn't innocent, the evidence speaks for itself. Evidence that you conveniently compiled over 18 months without any oversight or accountability. Evidence that has been verified by Korean prosecutors, Interpol, and the FBI. Evidence that led to the rescue of 63 trafficking victims. Evidence that exposed corruption in multiple agencies. If you're suggesting I somehow fabricated all of that, I'd be curious to hear your alternative explanation for where those victims came from. The defense lawyer had no response to that. Over the next 3 weeks, the prosecution presented their case. Witness after witness. Document after document, the evidence was overwhelming. The defense tried to argue that Kang had been unaware of the criminal activities, that his employees had acted without his knowledge, that he was a victim of circumstance. No one believed them. On the final day of testimony, one of the trafficking survivors took the stand. She was 19 years old, from the Philippines, and she'd been trafficked at age 16. Through a translator, she described how she'd been promised a job as a nanny in Seoul. How she'd arrived to find herself locked in a room with 11 other girls. How they'd been told they now owed money for their transport, their housing, their food. How they'd been forced to work in a brothel to pay off that debt. How Kang Min-jun had personally visited the brothel twice to collect money. She looked directly at him as she testified. He wouldn't meet her eyes. When she was done, the courtroom was silent. Even the defense lawyers looked uncomfortable. The jury, 3 judges in the Korean system, not a traditional jury, deliberated for 4 days. When they returned, their verdict was unanimous, guilty on all counts. The lead judge, a woman in her 60s, delivered the sentence with cold precision. Kang Min-jun, you have been found guilty of money laundering, human trafficking, racketeering, bribery, and numerous other charges. You have caused immeasurable harm to countless victims. You have corrupted legitimate businesses and institutions. And you have shown no remorse for your actions. She paused, looking at him directly. This court sentences you to 30 years in prison without possibility of parole. Your assets are to be seized and used to compensate victims and fund anti-trafficking efforts. You are stripped of all business licenses and board positions, and you are permanently banned from holding any corporate office in the Republic of Korea. Kang Min-jun's face showed nothing. But I saw his hands gripping the table in front of him, knuckles white. As the guards moved to take him away, he turned one last time to look at me. I held his gaze and mouthed 2 words, "You lost." That evening, I stood on the balcony of my hotel room, looking out at Seoul's skyline. The city lights sparkled like diamonds scattered across velvet. My phone buzzed, a text from James, "Congratulations, you did it." I texted back, "We did it." Another text came through, this one from one of the trafficking survivors I'd met during the trial preparation. "Thank you, Ms. Thompson. Because of you, I am free. I can go home. I can have a life. Thank you." I read that text 3 times, feeling something in my chest tighten and release. This was why I did this work, not for the money, though the money was good, not for the recognition, though that was gratifying in its own way, but for moments like this. For being able to give someone their life back. A knock at my door. I checked the security camera and saw Min Seo holding a bottle of champagne. I let her in. "To the woman who made the dragon bow," she said, popping the cork. We drank champagne on the balcony, watching Seoul's lights and talking about everything and nothing. "What's next for you?" Min Seo asked eventually. "I have 3 more cases waiting, one in Singapore, one in London, one in New York. Always moving. That's the job." "You know," Min Seo said thoughtfully, "what you did here changed things, not just taking down Kang, but the way you did it. Other women are going to follow your example, other investigators, other prosecutors, other people who have been told they don't belong or don't matter. I hope so. They're going to expect great things from you now. Then I'll have to keep delivering." We clinked glasses and drank to that. Epilogue 6 months later, I was in my office in New York, a small but elegant space in Manhattan with a view of Central Park when I received a package from Seoul. Inside was a newspaper clipping. The Korea Times business section. The headline read, "Paradise Seoul closes after scandal, building sold to development firm." But it wasn't the article that caught my attention. It was the handwritten note attached to it. "Thought you should know, the building that housed Paradise Seoul has been purchased and will be converted into a center for trafficking survivors, job training, counseling, legal assistance. They're calling it the Thompson Center." Apparently, one of Kang's seized assets was used to fund it. Poetic justice, I think. Min Seo, I stared at that note for a long time. The Thompson Center. A place named after me, dedicated to helping the people Kang had hurt. I thought about that night in Paradise Seoul. The humiliation, the rage, the calculated plan that had brought down an empire, and I thought about the girl from the Philippines standing in that courtroom, finally free. Sometimes justice looks like revenge, sometimes it looks like vindication, sometimes it looks like power rebalancing itself, but sometimes, just sometimes, justice looks like a building full of hope, carrying your name, standing on the ashes of someone else's evil empire. So I framed that newspaper clipping and hung it on my office wall, right where I could see it every day. A reminder that some dragons need to be brought down, and some women are perfectly capable of doing the bringing.